than to be a good leader. And I needed that, and your dad reinforced that.
I've had some tough times too, and Dad helped me through in several different ways, and those of you who are fathers might identify with this. He was not one who would sit and cry with me. That was my mom's job. He would meet with me every Monday morning. We met at Cindy's Delicatessen, and I would give him a progress report on how I was doing. And some weeks I did quite well, and I was making good progress. Other weeks I didn't, and I would try to give him all these speeches. I don't know if you heard that Bill Glass spoke last night to all the athletes, and he talked about those athletes that had a loser's limp, that when they really blow the play, all of a sudden they reach, I've got an injury. And they go through life with this loser's limp, and we blame situations and we blame circumstances. Well, I met one morning with Dad, and I had a loser's limp. He would have nothing to do with that. And he told me, he said, Brenda, I can't get on the floor and play in the game with you, but I can coach from the sidelines, but you're going to have to play in the game. And I left there and soon received a little piece of paper in an envelope from him. And it was just a Bible reference. And it was a proverb, and Dad said, just to read this. And the proverb was, he who controls his spirit is better than he who takes a city. And I think he was saying to me, Brenda, this is a bad situation, but if you'll just get a grip on yourself, if you will just get mentally and emotionally and spiritually disciplined about this, there's going to be good that comes out of it. And in fact, there really was. There were a lot of life changes, and the stream of my life took a different route, but it's been a wonderful, wonderful journey. And I'll share a funny story with you. At the end, Dad and Mom lived with me to the end of their lives, and Dad was there for 7 years. And toward the end of his life, he was totally bedbound. But on Saturday mornings, we would have a group of people, anywhere up to 35 people would come. I'd put chairs around his bed, and we called it Fred in bed. He would think all weekend. It was great. He spent all week thinking about what he wanted to do each weekend with all these people. And he was in dialysis 3 days a week. And we just had the best time doing this. And we got to work together because we started the breakfastwithfred.com website, which is still going strong. And go and sign up for the weekly thought. I take about 300 or 400 words of his wisdom each week and send it out on email. Just go to breakfastwithfred.com. But at one point, he said, Brenda, I need a thank you note. And I said, okay, tell me a little bit about this. I don't know, what kind of card to get. And of course, he couldn't go out. It was my job. And so he started laughing. And he said, I want a thank you card for Rick, who was my ex-husband. I said, really? He said, yeah. I want to thank him for leaving you because your life's been a whole lot better since then. And I said, Dad, I know we're looking for the good out of a bad situation, but that kind of pushes
it. Brenda, one of the things that I love most of all, you mentioned earlier, he had a high school education, but every time I had a chance to introduce him, I would introduce him as the wisest man that I've ever known. And I think the reason for that, among others, is the fact that he was a lifelong learner. He just ate up things. There wasn't anything that he got into, it seemed to me, that he didn't delve very deeply. And this was true right up through his 90s. I mean, if he, for example, was asked to go to and teach a Sunday school class, as he often was for Zig Ziglar, he would spend hours, if not days, preparing. Now, he knew more in a fraction of his life than I know totally. But every new experience was important to him. And he wasn't prepared to give anyone day-old manna. And what a lesson that's been to me. To make sure that, and I thought a lot about it coming down here. And what I told you 20 years ago is ancient history. I hope there's been something that's happened in the last 20 years, that could be helpful to you today, and that's what I want to focus on. And your dad was exceptionally good at that.
Well, he called it stay in the current reality. He would always say, that was then, this is now. And he had a really good distinction that I really enjoyed. The difference between a problem and a fact of life. A problem is something you can do something about. A fact of life, there's nothing you can do. And he said, too many people spend their life trying to change facts of life, and they walk past the opportunities to solve problems. And as I watched him flat on his back in a bed, he never lost the sense of the current reality. You'd ask him how he was doing, and his answer was, I'm delightfully dependent.
That is so true. I love an experience that he had one day. A young man came to him, as often, I've never known anyone that had so many people reaching out to them as Fred Smith. And so this young man came and posed a question to him, and your dad said, I really don't have the expertise to answer that. And I thought, how wise, I find myself, I don't know if you do or not, sometimes, when someone comes to us, we just expect ourselves to give them some answer. Well, a poor answer is worse than no answer at all. And Fred Smith knew that. And I tied to that was sort of the idea that he said, make sure you're dealing always in the area of your giftedness. There are a lot of things that I don't know, more than I care to admit. But there's some things that I know reasonably well. I'm sort of smiling to myself this morning. When Fred was 90, the two of us decided to do a little something different. And we decided to do a CD. Now, I really love music a lot, and so my job was to sing a few songs, and Fred's part of it was, and this is what was so vast and wonderful. You can imagine his experience over 90 years. But I asked him, I said, what I want you to share with the listener is, what have these hymns meant to you in your time of greatest need? That's what a good song should do for you. And so it was an incredible experience. We were back and forth. I was in Akron, Ohio. He was in Dallas. And Brenda's son was trying to engineer both sides of it. It was a hoot in many respects, but very complex. So one day, in one of my famous phone calls, I called Fred. And I said, Fred, what can I do for you? Expecting, something wise and profound and so forth. To which he replied, practice. 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 And sure enough, that's exactly what I needed at the time. But said in a wonderful way. There wasn't any gobbledygook, but that was Fred, I always got that kind of advice from him. Another thing I really admired so much was that I don't think there was probably ever a time, Brenda, that I called that he didn't answer. And isn't that a wonderful example of how it is with Christ? The communication is just that easy. And I used to say to myself, how in the world can he take time today with hundreds, if not thousands of people reaching out to him? And yet he gave me the feeling that I was the only person in the universe. And he would give me as much time as I needed. What was interesting, though, is that I remember that maybe one time, but I don't think he ever called me. Maybe once or twice, but the point I wanted to make was, which I loved, was that he was prepared to give me everything that I needed, but would never intrude on my life. That was a great lesson. Great lesson. Infinitely patient with me. And sometimes this would go on, literally sometimes well over an hour. And again, I came to the end of each of those feelings. Boy, if it's this good on earth, can you imagine what heaven's going to be like? A wonderful time for me.
Dad had an interesting way of thinking. He thought in categories, and he had mental files, so that when Ron would call, all Dad did was open his Ron Glosser file in his mind, because he thought about Ron all the time. And he was always thankful. Ron always ended every conversation, "What can I do for you, Fred?" And Dad told so many people about it. That really, really touched his heart. And I think about the power of mentoring. I think about the one question that Dad often asked people. He said, "Who first said to you, 'I believe in you'?" That's a powerful question. And then he would turn it around and say, "Who are you saying, 'I believe in you'?" And you just think in your own lives, ooh, that often started the path that you were on. And Ron, you know Bill Glatz's ministry. He tells us that the majority of the men in those prisons never had anybody say, "I believe in you." And I am most grateful for a mom and a dad who really, way before women's lib, really, when I was telling Ron one day that when we were little, we would leave the house, and there were three of us. I have a brother and a sister. My parents would always say to us as we left, "Now remember who you are, where you're from, and what you represent." You know, an 8-year-old just kind of, but that was part of the litany of leaving the house.
You know, thinking about people that believed in you, that's been one of the great joys, and I talked with John about this, of writing the book, is that it's brought back to my mind just countless individuals who have impacted my life. As you know, Brenda, I grew up as the youngest of 9 children, and my father died when I was 4, so it was an unusual childhood in that sense. But the incredible thing is that God was constantly bringing alongside me people that wanted to help me. And I've talked about a lot of these people in my earlier times down here, but one comes to mind this morning, and every time I have a chance, as we're doing this morning here to speak, I think about a time when I was 16 years of age, attending the First Baptist Church there in Coshocton, Ohio. And William Green, who was then the president of the AFL-CIO, the most respected labor leader in America, headquarters in Washington, approached me after a Sunday morning service and said, "Young man, we're going to make you a speaker." Now, I have to tell you, that was like suggesting that I was getting ready for the next moonshot. I just couldn't believe it. And so I remember asking him, I said, "Well, how do you propose doing this?" And he said, "Well, my daughter was a speech major in college. She's going to take you under her wing, and we're going to do that." Well, fast forward a little bit. He went back to Washington. I continued to work with his daughter.